Chapter 7. What Happened to Happily Ever After? I am standing in the master bedroom of a magnificent two-bedroom suite at the Pierre Hotel in New York City. I stare at the 1-inch thick deck of index cards in my hands and begin practicing my marital vows. I can't believe I'm marrying Mario, I say to myself. Today is going to be one of the happiest days of my life. Like any other bride on her wedding day, I am nervous and apprehensive. I have butterflies in my stomach and goosebumps on my arms. I'm worried about how I will look in my dress and whether the groom will be on time. Actually, although I still consider myself young, thank you very much, I'm not exactly a blushing bride. It's December 16th, 2009, and I am about to marry my husband for the second time. And I am about to marry. We haven't been separated or divorced. We are reaffirming our commitment and loyalty to one another by renewing our vows. Our first wedding day, almost 18 years ago, was in March of 1992, but today I feel as if I'm marrying Mario for the first time. A few months ago, I approached him with this idea of a vow renewal ceremony. I could have waited for a milestone anniversary, but the timing felt right. I was renewing other aspects of my life, so why not renew one of the most important, my marriage and my relationship with my husband? And since I never do anything on a small scale, I wanted Mario and I to stand in front of our daughter and closest friends, just a few cameramen, and over 1 million Real Housewives of New York viewers, and profess our love and loyalty to one another. Being the loving and supportive husband that he is, Mario agreed. Okay, maybe the sexy black lingerie I was wearing and the glass of bubbly champagne he was drinking when I proposed the idea may have persuaded him a bit, but never mind. My newly short blonde hair has been trimmed and blown out by hairstylist Oscar Blondie, and I slip into my gorgeous Kimberly Towers wedding dress. It's a stunning strapless gown made of ivory Duchess silk satin with a ruched form-fitting bodice and whimsical ostrich feathers and crystals on the bottom skirt. When I look at myself in the 6-foot Venetian trifold mirror, I truly feel like a bride on her wedding day. I am 100% confident that I made the right decision to marry Mario. I can't say I felt that day on our wedding. I felt that day on our first wedding day. I felt that way on our first wedding day. I knew that I loved Mario, but I was so scared by my parents' dysfunctional relationship that I had no faith in the unity of marriage. I saw marriage as a prison and had a history of choosing emotionally distant men as a way to avoid becoming trapped. When I decided to marry Mario, I took a leap of faith that our relationship would be based on mutual love and respect. And for nearly 18 years, that is exactly what our marriage has been. My thoughts are suddenly interrupted when a vision of my younger self appears in the mirror by my side. For a split second, I think I am hallucinating, but then I realize Avery is standing next to me. She is wearing a royal blue silk satin dress trimmed with silver and periwinkle rhinestones. She slips on her Bachelor Mishka sequin heels and asks me to fasten the clasp of her necklace, which I've given her from my jewelry collection. My eyes begin to swell with tears. This moment is surreal. From the very first time, I am seeing my daughter as a graceful, young woman she is poised to become. It is as if I'm seeing her from an entirely new vantage point. I think to myself, I can't believe how quickly Avery has grown up. Mario and I are so blessed to have her in our lives. I take Avery's hand and we walk to the rotunda, the Pierre's signature room where the ceremony is being held. It is a beautiful, elegant, cream-colored room with hand-painted frescoes on the ceiling. I see Mario. He is wearing a black tuxedo and is as handsome as ever. He is pacing back and forth, reciting his vows. Mario, are you okay? I ask. You look nervous. Before he can respond, Avery interjects. What's wrong with you two? Why are you so nervous? You're already married. That's true, honey, Mario says, but the last time we got married, we weren't doing it in front of millions of viewers who will blog about the ceremony and point out every little mistake we make. I laugh. Leave it to Mario to put us all at ease. Suddenly, the instrumental music begins. Mario walks down the baluster staircase on cue. He is followed by Avery, who's carrying our dog Coco. They are so adorable in their matching blue dresses. They position themselves at the center of the picturesque, pale yellow rotunda at the center of the base of the stairs. The music changes, and it's my turn to walk down the staircase. I take a deep breath and step carefully, gripping my hand on the golden baluster. I am wearing 6-inch platform, silver metallic Cassidy heels, and I don't want to fall, especially not on camera. As I descend, I look into the faces of my close friends who have gathered here to support us. I feel so vibrant, beautiful, and alive. I turn and face Mario. He has tears in his hazel eyes. At that moment, I can feel the love he has for me. We join hands. All my fears and nerves subside. In this moment, I realize that I love Mario even more than the day I married him. Adam, our good friend for many years, begins the ceremony. He says wonderful things about our loving relationship, our equal partnership, and our parenting of Avery. I recite my vows, and at one point I am so overcome with emotion that my voice cracks and I almost lose it. Then it is Mario's turn. Ramona, probably the biggest decision one will ever make is the person to spend the rest of your life with. Sometimes it takes quite a while before you know if you've made the right choice. I was fortunate to have known very early that I had made the right decision. My mom had suffered a stroke, and she would need care for the rest of her life. Since Dad had already passed away, I asked you if it was all right if my mom could live with us in our home in Southampton. Not only did you take her in, but you embraced her with love and kindness like she was your own mother. That is when I knew I made the right decision. I had absolutely chosen the woman I would spend the rest of my life with. For 17 years of marriage, you have been at my side through everything that life has thrown at us, both good and bad. You have been a steady rock in times of trouble and a ray of sunshine when I couldn't see the light. You have applauded my achievements and comforted me in my setbacks. You have given me the most wonderful daughter a father could ever have. For all of this, I am blessed, and so I reaffirm my vows that I said so long ago. Ramona, I will love and honor you through good times and bad, for better or worse, in sickness and in health, until death do us part. May God continue to bless our marriage. His vows are honest, loving, and heartfelt. We kiss a slow, romantic kiss. I open my eyes and look at my daughter and then out to our friends. There's not a dry eye in the house. That was one of the happiest moments of my life, second only to the birth of our daughter. If someone had told me on that day that my marriage would be over in 4 years and the intimate details of its collapse would become fodder for tabloid headlines, I would never have believed it. Mario and I were so happy for so many years. We were the perfect couple. And then Avery came into our lives, and we became the perfect family. We proudly referred to ourselves as a trifecta. We had an impenetrable family bond that nothing could destroy, or so we thought. How did this happen to us? How did we end up so broken? The first indication I had that Mario was unhappy in our marriage was towards the end of September 2012. I think at that point he was beginning to feel neglected because I had been doing this show for 5 seasons, and when I wasn't filming, I was traveling all over the country doing signings for Ramona Pinot Grigio. I was just beginning to realize that I had stretched myself too thin and had taken my eye off my other businesses. I can see now that I had taken my eye off my marriage as well. When Mario expressed that he was unhappy, it broke my heart because I had no idea that I had been hurting him. I remember he told me that he was unhappy and that he felt like I had been chipping away at him. It bothered him when I rushed him off the tennis court or snapped at him when we were running late for an event. I promised to stop doing those things, and I kept my promise. We spent that weekend talking, crying, and making mad, passionate love over and over again. It was as if our bodies had been ignited by opening up to one another. In December, we took Avery on vacation to Anguilla. Some close friends were renting a villa on a beach near our hotel, and Avery would have sleepovers with their daughter, so Mario and I had plenty of romantic time. All the passionate warmth that we had been feeling over the last couple months continued to build. We had a private balcony with a hot tub that was so enormous it was like having a mini pool on our terrace. It was so secluded you could spend your days and nights completely nude with no one around to see you. For 7 days, we made love in the oversized hot tub, worked out together, ate romantic dinners, and walked along the beach. I remember one evening swimming together in the infinity pool by the hotel bar, Mario's arms encircling me as we watched the sunset. I felt so complete in that moment. I told Mario how blessed I felt. After all these years, We still had such an intense connection. With Avery leaving for college, I would have been devastated if we didn't have another one. We celebrated New Year's Eve in Anguilla, and as we moved into 2013, I felt confident things between us were back on track. Mario wrote me a beautiful, meaningful card for Valentine's Day, and we celebrated our 21st wedding anniversary in March. I think things started to go downhill when Mario found out how much I was going to make for season 6 of Real Housewives. We began filming in May, and it was in June, while we were away in Africa, that I first noticed him pulling away from me. Even though we were on this amazing family vacation, he seemed distant and out of sync with me. Mario had just turned 60. Avery was about to leave for college, and his business was struggling. On top of that, his wife of 21 years had become famous and was earning a great salary. I think he just wasn't feeling good about himself. Looking back, I think if filming had started in the fall, we would have been okay. After we returned from Africa, I was filming 7 or 8 times a week, sometimes twice a day, and I was preoccupied with Avery leaving for college. I told myself at the end of September, I will concentrate on Mario. Little did I know that by the end of September, it would be too late. I had no clue that something was shifting in our marriage. Mario didn't communicate that he was still unhappy, and I didn't see the path he was on leading him further and further away from our marriage. One day at the end of August, I remember Mario running out to play tennis at a friend's. He said he was going to shower there and meet me later at a party. I noticed that he had left his wedding ring on the nightstand, and I remember wondering, why wasn't he wearing his ring? Should I ask him? But something held me back, and I never called him on it. I couldn't deal with what it could mean, so I convinced myself that it wasn't a big deal. Meanwhile, a friend of Mario's who had been divorced for years had become a permanent fixture at our home that summer, and I felt like it was infringing on our privacy. I remember his friend would disappear during the day for a bit to give us alone time, but in the evenings, he came to all the parties with us, and I began to feel he was encouraging Mario to go to the ones that were more geared towards singles. It seemed to me that his friend, who I didn't think was very attractive and hadn't had a girlfriend in years, was using Mario as bait to meet single girls at these parties, and he would take Mario away from me to troll around and flirt. I remember more than once when I went looking for Mario, I found him surrounded by single women. They would be standing very close to him, and it seemed like when I approached, they would take a step back. It started to feel like Mario was more interested in going to parties than hanging out with our married friends. Looking back, these things seem like obvious red flags, but at the time, I let it go because I thought, what's the harm if my husband is happy? That was my biggest mistake. June and July were good, but by August and September, I felt Mario's behavior was becoming increasingly erratic. He seemed irritable and angry, and I began to worry about his emotional health. He had been having issues with his knee and couldn't play tennis, which was his usual way of releasing stress, so I tried to be patient with him. But despite my efforts to be sweet and calm, by the end of September, I felt like he was becoming more and more confrontational. At one point, one of my close girlfriends witnessed us having a huge blowout, and she expressed concern that Mario wasn't treating me well. She also told me that she had noticed that he was gone for 45 minutes when he took our dog Coco out for a walk. She felt this was suspicious and asked me if I thought it was possible that he could be having an affair. When men disappear for long stretches like that to walk the dog, they're usually talking to their girlfriends. At the time, I laughed it off because, of course, that wasn't happening to me. Mario wasn't being unfaithful. It was inconceivable. All that summer and into the fall, I was working nonstop. I remember the night of our cast party after we wrapped filming for season 6. I wanted Mario to come with me like he always had at the end of every other season, but he said he wasn't going to Westchester. He was going to Westchester with a friend instead and didn't come home until after midnight. What can you do in Westchester after midnight? I questioned. Where was he? I felt he would get defensive and snap at me. At that point, I felt his behavior had become unacceptable, so I decided to go to our Southampton house by myself for the weekend to get some space. When I came home, I remember Mario told me he thought he needed to move out for a while. For the first time, I considered the possibility that there might be another woman, and I asked him straight out if there was. He told me no, and I believed him. After that, he gave me a letter in which he explained how unhappy he had been. I tried to understand where all this was coming from because I felt we had been happy all summer. I remember his response was that it was because he was a good actor. I told him that he owed it to our marriage to go to counseling, so we started going to therapy together, and I was hopeful that we would figure out a way to resolve our issues. That October, I remember walking along Park Avenue with one of my good friends before going to therapy one day, and she said to me, I hate to be the one to tell you this, but I think you need to know. She paused and then said slowly, I think Mario has been seeing another woman. What are you talking about? I said in complete denial. Well, the other night when we were at Plaza Athénée for that party, people overheard him arguing with a woman on his cell phone when he was in the men's room. He was screaming at her. I was stunned. I remember that Mario had gone off that night to make a phone call, and I had to admit that I did think he was gone for a little too long. I had also thought it was strange that he had wanted to meet me at the party since Mario hates arriving at events on his own. That evening, we went to therapy, and I decided to bring up what my friend had told me. Although I felt as though we were making progress, and I didn't want him to think I didn't trust him, I couldn't get what my friend told me out of my head. I asked him if he had been fighting on the phone with the woman at the Plaza Athénée party, but I felt like he just brushed me off and made a joke of it, so decided to drop the subject. At home, later that same night, I walked into the den and I saw Mario was talking on the phone. I remember as soon as I walked into the room, he got very stiff. Alan, let me go now. Ramona just walked in, he said, and abruptly ended the call. Alan is a good friend, so I said, Mario, why did you hang up? I would have said hello to Alan. This is a different Alan. You don't know him, he answered. I sat down beside Mario. He seemed to be getting agitated. He asked me why I had come into the room, but I couldn't remember. My mind was blank. Then something in my mind just snapped. It was like a veil had been lifted, and it dawned on me that he had not been talking on the phone to a different Alan, or any other man for that matter. I stood up and I looked at him. Mario, that wasn't a different Alan on the phone, was it? You were just talking to a girl, weren't you? I remember his face looked like he had seen a ghost. His eyes went wide, his mouth fell open. He had the same expression on his face when I was pregnant with Avery and I told him that my water broke and we had to go to the hospital. He looked like a deer in headlights. Just admit you were talking to a girl. Just admit it, I shouted. He snapped out of it and got defensive. Yes, I was. Do you want to know what else I do with her besides talk? Oddly, I suddenly felt calmer than I had in weeks. I said, no, that's all I need to know for now, and walked out of the room. Needed to clear my head, so I left the apartment. I met a girlfriend for dinner at a restaurant in the neighborhood and told her what had just happened. When I came back a few hours later, Mario was on the phone with one of our friends, and I heard him say, Ramona's just walked in. She's home. She's okay. At first, when I got home, he seemed nervous and scared, but an hour or so later, he began to seem more and more self-righteous. I remember we were in our bedroom, and Mario asked me if I wanted to know if anything more had happened. I told him he didn't need to say anything because I already knew. I remember he kept saying that it meant nothing and it was just a symptom of his unhappiness. I was in a state of shock and disbelief. How could this be happening? The following morning at breakfast, I remember Mario telling me he was already planning to end it. Famous last lying words. The next day, I was at the gym and I started getting phone calls from the press saying they were going to come out with an article stating that Mario was seen having dinner with another woman at Serafina. It was like a knife had sliced open my chest and my guts were ripped out of my body. I just kept thinking, he promised he wouldn't see her anymore. How could he lie to me like that? It was bad enough that he was seeing another woman, but now it was going to be in the press that he took her to a restaurant where I'm a friend of the owner and my Pinot is served. Why would he disrespect us like that? I called Mario and said, a story is coming out that you were seen having dinner with another woman. You didn't see her, did you? He had that he said that he had. I was shocked. I thought you told me you were going to stop seeing her, he said. He never told me that. I thought, who is this man? How can he tell me at breakfast that he was planning on ending it and then turn around the next day and act like we never had that conversation? I felt like I was losing my mind. If my husband had suddenly become Jekyll and Hyde one minute, he could he could be warm, loving, and remorseful, and the next he would be defiant, belligerent, and angry. I began to feel like I didn't know which Mario I was going to see from one day to the next. I thought we needed to talk about what was happening in therapy, but Mario seemed reluctant, so I agreed to talk over dinner that night. We met in an Italian restaurant downtown. It was such a surreal moment. We were sitting in this beautiful restaurant, and my husband was ordering wine as if we were having a normal romantic dinner. But really, the bottom had just dropped out of my world. I said to Mario, "You can't see her anymore. You have to end it." I remember he looked at me and said, "I can't promise you that." I basically was in shock. He can't promise me that? What does that mean? Does he think he's going to be friends with both of us? Who is this? Does he think he's going to be with both of us? Who is this man? How can this be happening? This is a nightmare. This isn't real. In all the years we were married, it never once crossed my mind that my husband would have an affair, much less that it would become a tabloid headline. I remember sitting across the table from Mario and thinking, this isn't my husband. I just could not comprehend that this was who he had become. Even now, there's a part of me that thinks that Mario's dead, that the person I sat across from that night was an imposter who invaded his body and took over his mind. Over the course of the next year, things that were written in the press about Mario and this woman were so much worse than I could have ever imagined that night. It's painful enough to come face to face with the possibility that you have been lied to and betrayed by your partner of 21 years, but to have to do that under the harsh, judgmental glare of the tabloid press is humiliating beyond comprehension. I had no time to process what was happening in my marriage, no time to digest the small morsel of truth that I could bear to swallow, before the most horrendous images were being forced down my throat. At that point, the most important thing for me to do was protect Avery. She was already on edge at school, not only because she was struggling with the transition of being away. She had a falling out with her best friend from high school, who was also now at college with her, and it was such a small campus that it impacted all her friendships. She would call me every week crying because it was making her life miserable. The last thing she needed was to be worrying about what was going on with her father and me at home. I was afraid that her knowing about Mario would push her over the edge, and I was not going to let that happen. I knew my marriage was already broken, but I wasn't about to take Avery down with us. The morning that the article came out, she woke up at 8 a.m. to 8 missed calls on her cell phone for numbers she didn't recognize. She called us in a panic because she thought someone had died. The one thing Mario and I agreed on at that point was that we needed to keep Avery out of it. So we pretended that the article was no big deal. I basically ate crow to protect my daughter. I remember the three of us were on the phone, and Mario and I told her it was just press looking for a comment on a silly article and she shouldn't worry about it. She believed us because she had put her father on a pedestal her entire life. It killed me to lie to Avery like that, but at that time I felt it was the right thing to do. A week later, we went down to Atlanta to visit Avery for Parents' Day. I had told Mario at dinner that night that I didn't think he should come with me, but Avery is his daughter too, and I think he felt I was being unfair. So I said, "All right, Mario, we're going to Atlanta next week. You have to make a decision. You either end it with this girl or move out. It's your choice, one or the other. When we got to Atlanta, I will know if you're texting this girl. I will feel it, and I won't be able to hide it from Avery. We're away for 4 days. Do not speak to her and do not text her. We don't want Avery to know anything is going on, so please just don't." Of course, when we went down to Atlanta, I was on edge the entire time. I remember shopping with Avery at Sephora and asking her, "Where's your father?" because I sensed that he was off somewhere talking on the phone. If we were at a restaurant and he got up to walk Coco, I would tell him to leave his phone at the table because I feel he had been texting her. At dinner that night, Avery was using my phone and she came across the story that had been in the press. Up to that point, she had been living in a bubble at school and hadn't really read the article. I knew I needed to do some damage control. So when she got up from the table, I followed her and cornered her in the bathroom. And Avery said to me, "What's going on? You're acting so weird, making Daddy leave his phone at the table. Daddy's all quiet and spacey. I saw that article on your phone. What does that mean?" I wanted to gauge her state of mind without saying anything that would influence her thinking. So I said, "Avery, what do you think of all this? Do you think your dad is having an affair?" Without hesitation, she answered, "Obviously, it's ridiculous. That would never happen. You and Daddy have one of the best marriages I've ever seen out of all your friends and all my friends' parents. Daddy would never have an affair. You would never have an affair." I felt my best shot at getting through to Mario at that point was if he heard how unconditionally our daughter trusted us, how much she believed in our marriage. So I said to her, "Okay, when we go back out there, I want you to tell your father that." When we sat back down at the table, she said to Mario, Daddy, I saw the article. I'm so sorry. I can't believe people are attacking you like this. You and mommy have one of the best marriages. If I had to choose which one of you would have an affair, literally gun to my head, I couldn't choose. I know you both love each other too much to do something like that. I hoped that if Mario heard Avery saying that her father, she knew would never do that to her mother, it would resonate with him. I felt that his behavior had been so far off from the man I knew. He must be having some type of life crisis. I truly believed that if he looked into his daughter's eyes and saw how much he had to lose, his love for her would put him back on track. I think she did get through to him because when we got back home, he went into therapy and attempted to resume to resume to resume our normal lives. I even threw a dinner party for 12 at our house in Southampton. For a little while, things seemed to be getting back to normal. In November, Mario took me to Charleston. He bought me a Chanel bag for my birthday, and we had a beautiful time. But just 2 weeks later, things seemed to shift again, and I began to feel Mario pulling away. It was like Jekyll and Hyde again. I remember our therapist said to me, Ramona, it's like he's bludgeoning you for whatever he thinks you did to him in the marriage. In December, right before Avery was about to come home for winter break, we took a trip to Naples because Mario was thinking about retiring and wanted to check out what it would be like to live there. The last thing I wanted to do was sell off everything and move to Florida, but I was trying to be supportive and loving wife, and I hoped it would salvage our marriage for us to get away together. We did make love that weekend, but he seemed distant and detached. We weren't connecting. Everything felt forced. At one point, we were watching the sunset together, and I remember Mario pulled out his phone and took a picture of it. Something about it felt wrong to me, like he wasn't really in the moment with me. I felt a deep longing for the sense of connection I had felt just 1 year earlier while we were watching the sunset in Anguilla. The day after we got home from Naples, I was busy preparing for Avery's arrival home for winter break. I remember being annoyed with Mario because he was late getting home from work. I was in Avery's room making sure it was all set up for her return when I started receiving texts from a woman telling me in crude and explicit language that she had just been with my husband in the apartment he was paying for her. He was paying for. The text said that Mario loved me and she couldn't be with him because she knew he loved me. She also forwarded me dozens of screenshots of texts and photos that she claimed Mario had sent to her. Among them was a photo Mario had taken with his phone of that sunset he and I watched together in Naples. I felt like someone had ripped my heart from my chest. When Mario finally got home, he found me in Avery's room, visibly upset. He asked what was wrong, and I told him about the texts. Tears stung my eyes and then began screaming down my face. At that moment, we heard Avery's voice calling, Hi, Mom, I'm home. As she walked through the front door, I remember Mario saying to me, Ramona, straighten yourself up fast. Avery's here. We don't want her to know anything. I froze, numb with shock. I knew she must have heard us fighting, and I didn't know what to do or say. It must have seemed to Avery like she had stepped into the twilight zone. Instead of being greeted at the door by her loving parents, she walked into this very tense situation. It was literally the very first time in her entire life she had heard us fight. Of course, sometimes we would snap or be petty, but it was always little things like, Mario, you're not ready, or Ramona, you didn't clean up, but never anything like this scene that she had just walked in on. My maternal instincts kicked in, and I did my best to pull myself together and put on a happy front. I said to myself, I must protect Avery, no matter what. I walked out of her bedroom, and Avery was standing in the living room with this look on her face that was equal parts confusion and fear. In the 6 weeks since she had left at the end of October, I had lost 15 pounds. I was emaciated. She kept asking me, Mommy, what's wrong with you? You look like a skeleton. But there was no way I could tell her what was really going on. After that, Mario promised to end it. I felt like he could see how much pain I was in and was truly remorseful. The week after Christmas, the three of us drove to Southampton, stopping to pick up food from La Parmigiania, our favorite restaurant in town, just like we always had after a long drive in from the city. I kept telling myself, we are the singers, we are a trifecta. We will get through this, and things will be as they always were. But we would never be the same again. A few days later, Mario got a voicemail from a woman saying that if he didn't give her money, she was going to go to the press. At that point, there had only been one article, which had been damaging enough. The last thing we needed while we were trying to salvage our marriage was a full-blown media firestorm. Just the threat of it was so stressful that we got into a huge fight. Avery was in her room on the other end of the house, but she heard us screaming at one another. She told me later that it felt like something out of a movie. She described hearing me yell something like, "What are you going to do? We need to protect Avery." And her father said, "I don't know. It's your problem, Ramona. Deal with it." She couldn't make out a lot of what we were saying, so she crept down the staircase and stood listening at the bottom. That's when she heard her father say, "Ramona, I am one step away from walking out that door," and me screaming, "Why don't you just go fuck her?" It kills me to think how painful it must have been for Avery to hear us say those things. She told me later that at that moment she felt as if her world shattered into a million jagged little pieces. She snapped and just ran. She ran out the door into a torrential rainstorm and collapsed onto the ground. She pulled out her cell phone and did what any teenage girl would do when she realizes her life is falling apart. She called her best friend. That's when Mario must have heard her outside. Avery was screaming and hysterically crying, and not realizing that she had overheard us arguing, he thought she was in physical pain. He ran out after her into the pouring rain, but when he tried to approach her, she screamed, "Don't come near me. You cheated on mommy. Fuck you. I hate you. Don't come closer. Get away from me." Mario came to get me, and eventually we got Avery to calm down enough to come back inside. Later, Avery told me that she had asked Mario not to tell me what she had heard. She had asked Mario not to tell me what she had heard because she didn't want to upset me, but I think he didn't know what else to do, so he told me anyway. I remember being panicked, thinking, what do I do? What do I tell her? I was crying. Avery was crying. It was awful. I couldn't stand seeing my daughter in such pain, so I made a decision to take control of the situation and find a way to convince my daughter that she had misunderstood. I remember the three of us sitting down in our finished basement where we have this long L-shaped couch. Avery and I were sitting next to one another on the end of the couch, and Mario was way over on the far end. I remember looking at him just sitting there staring down at the floor, quiet as a mouse. He might as well have been 1,000 miles away. I needed to assess what she thought she knew, so I asked, "Avery, what did you hear?" "I heard that there's a woman or someone who's threatening us. I heard Daddy say he was one step away from walking out the door, and I heard you say something like, 'Why don't you just go fuck her?'" Most convincing lies are steeped in truth, so I very delicately spun a web using threads of what she had heard and what I knew she wanted to believe. "Avery, you misunderstood what we were saying. There is a woman who is stalking your father. She wants our money. She's the one who published the fake article in the press. When I said go fuck her, I didn't mean physically. I meant screw her. Who cares what she does? She can't hurt us." I looked into my daughter's eyes, and what I saw there in that very moment was pure relief. Avery is not a naive person. She's a very intelligent, savvy young woman who can smell bullshit from a mile away. She believed my lie because for most of her life we were the perfect family. We raised her with a very strong sense of morality. She idolized her father. Mario was always a moral, Christian, God-fearing man. Every Sunday, until she was 13 years old, he dragged her out of bed to go to church. It was much easier to believe the lie I told her than what she had heard with her own ears. Meanwhile, I was deteriorating physically and emotionally. I was disappearing into myself. I couldn't eat. I couldn't sleep. I knew once Avery went back to college, I would be alone with Mario, and I was beginning to realize that I couldn't be around him anymore. It felt like no matter what I did, he seemed to be getting angrier and angrier with me. I think he was, in fact, angry with himself for being unfaithful, but he's turned his rage on me because he couldn't handle the guilt. He never laid a hand on me, but he would get this white rage in his eyes and he began to feel very threatened and afraid. The stress of everything became unmanageable, and it began to wreak havoc on my mind, body, and spirit. There were times when I was so low that I almost felt like throwing myself in front of a subway train. I was so anxious and depressed that my doctor put me on anxiety medication. I think at this point that Mario finally began to see how much of a toll we were going through had taken on me. In January, we took Avery to see Kinky Boots, and I kept nodding off because I was taking too much anxiety medication. I didn't realize it at the time, but I was medicating myself to combat depression. I remember Mario taking my hand to nudge me awake, and when I looked at him for the first time, I thought I could see a sign that he wanted my forgiveness. But at that point, I was so emotionally broken that I couldn't find it in myself to forgive. In order to forgive him, I needed to heal. And in order to heal, I needed time on my own, away from Mario. I was so distraught that I was having terrible diarrhea. My stomach was tied up in knots from stress, and it had gotten to the point that whenever I was around him, I would lose my stool. I had to get my health back on track. A week or so before Avery went back to college, I took her to lunch and asked how she would feel if I asked her father to move out. Why? She asked wearily. Because things are strained among us right now. We need to have a break. Your father is full of anger towards me, as you have witnessed, and I'm nervous around him. She hugged me and said, Mommy, I support you. I don't really understand, but I support you. That last week Avery was home, I basically avoided Mario as much as I could. For the first time, I was the one pulling away, and I think Mario felt that. In fact, Avery told me he kept asking her, Have you heard from your mom? Where's your mom? Then one night I came home and Avery told me that Mario had come into her room. He was very distraught and was questioning her about me in a very intense, aggressive way. Daddy's looking for you. He needs to talk to you. He kept pushing me to tell him if you had said anything about what's wrong with you. I kept saying that I didn't feel it was my place. I was like, Daddy, I don't want to go in the middle of this. All I can say is mom's really not okay. But he kept pushing. Your mom is going to ask me to move out, isn't she? Tell me your mom told you she wants me out. He was freaking out, so I told him you said you were going to ask him to move out after I go back to school. He just broke down and started crying. Dad never cries. He was saying, I know I've been awful. I've been pushing her away, Avery, and I think I pushed her too far. I love her so much. I'm sorry. I've done some awful things. I haven't been the man that I was. He was acting so weird. I said, Dad, did you have an affair? He just kind of stared down at his hands and didn't say anything. So I said, Well, Dad, you're not jumping to say no here, so I'm assuming that's a yes. You guys can stop lying to me now, Mommy. I know Daddy had an affair. What I did next, I will regret for the rest of my life. I said to Avery, Don't say anything to your father about any of this. Don't get angry, just play it cool. At the time, I felt that Mario was in a fragile state, and I didn't want to deal with any kind of white rage from him after Avery had gone back to school. I just wanted to contain the situation because I felt like his behavior was so erratic. I was scared and I was weak. So basically, asked my daughter, who had just told me that she had found out that her father was not the man she thought he was, not to feel what she had a right to feel and not to express what she had a right to express. I remember right before Avery left for school, we all went out for dinner for our last dinner in the city. The three of us sat there making small talk, and she had to pretend that everything was okay because that's what I asked her to do. She hadn't spoken to Mario since their conversation in the room. No one addressed the elephant in the room because she loves me and she loves her father. Avery began to play along. She was never allowed to lose it or be angry, which wasn't healthy for her. After that, Avery actually put herself in therapy because I would call her crying, and she told me Mario would call her crying. She was only 17 years old, and she was playing mediator to her parents. I am so grateful that she has a strong sense of self and that she has come through this without becoming jaded or bitter. The next day, Mario drove Avery to the airport, and when he got back, we met for breakfast. I said to him, Mario, I left some bags out for you. You need to pack your stuff up and you need to leave. I remember him being in shock and saying, Please don't do this. I said, I can't be around you. I'm a wreck. I can't. I just can't. My heart was broken. My body was destroyed. I was over medicating to numb the pain. I was falling apart and I just needed some time to myself. Once Mario moved out and I no longer had the stress of seeing him every day, I started to regain my health. I was able to sleep at night. I began to feel more like myself and I stopped taking anxiety medication. 2 weeks later, I contacted Mario and I told him I thought we should go out to Southampton together. I was feeling stronger and healthier and thought we could go out there and talk about him moving back in. I expected him to be receptive, but I remember that he said he wanted to go out there by himself because he needed some time alone. I decided to drive out to the house and surprise him anyway. Honestly, in the back of my mind, I did think there would be another woman there, but I just figured that if it happened, I would calmly tell Mario to ask her to leave. When I got to the house and he saw me standing in the doorway, he had this strange look in his eyes. I remember thinking, he doesn't look right. His eyes don't look right. Something's weird here. He asked me what I was doing there, but the way he was looking at me scared, I panicked. I couldn't bring myself to say that I was there to work on our marriage, so I said something like, Oh, I'm just here to get some contact lenses, and tried to move past him into the house. I remember he put his hands on my shoulders and physically pushed me out of the house. Somehow, I was able to twist and duck under his arms to move around him. And as soon as I was inside, I knew there was another woman in the house, in my house. I could sense someone upstairs looking down from the catwalk. I saw takeout from La Parmigiana in the kitchen, and I remember thinking, how could he order from our restaurant? Things escalated quickly, and I called the police. They came out to the house and made a report. While they were questioning us, I was in one room and Mario was in another. I heard the policeman say, Mario, you're going to have to leave with your guest. And then I remember hearing this female voice whining, why do we have to be the ones to leave? We just drove 4 hours. I would have laughed if it weren't so sad. The police report should have been private, but someone leaked it to the press, so once again, we found ourselves the subject of ugly tabloid headlines. At that point, I was in a state of shock. I was vulnerable, and I felt that I needed to speak to a divorce lawyer just to get some information. What I really wanted was some kind of legal separation, but things escalated quickly, and on January 29th, 2014, I filed for divorce. I realized the night before we were going to serve Mario with the divorce papers that things had snowballed and I wasn't ready for such a drastic final step. I tried to stop it from happening, but it was too late. The wheels had been set in motion and there was nothing I could do. Who knows? Maybe if I hadn't filed for divorce, we wouldn't be where we are now.